So we're going to work with switch statements. And since we already covered methods, we're going to be using them. We're going to be using as we introduce ideas, we're going to try to use them as much as we can so you get comfortable with them and familiar with them and seeing them in code. So a switch statement, you're going to need to use this, excuse me, at some point or another. You're going to need to use a switch statement at some point or another. And they're really, really simple, but they can be confusing if you don't know the structure and the parts. So let's kind of get into it quickly. Now, I want to point something out before we go further, and this has to do with clean code. Most people are lazy when I see them write code. They don't take the time to indent, clean up white space, and make their code look neat. Neat in a sense of organized. The reason that we do this is so that as your code expands and you have 2,000 lines of code and you're going back and looking through it, it's not this jumbled, confusing mess. It also helps you spot errors quickly. For example, if this was all butchered up, I might not see this popping out. It's letting me know that it's missing a part of this. So, off of the rant and on to... Here's another little tip. If you press the insert key on your keyboard, you get this kind of black cursor that appears over the letter. Normally, if you have a cursor in front of it and you push something, you type something, it pushes everything in front of it to the right. If you have the insert key on, it replaces it and then moves to the next location. So something to keep in mind, something that's just a handy little thing, is the insert key. At least when you're using Eclipse, I use that quite a bit. You'll have it where you need to do something a bunch of times. And now notice I need to change these. I need to update each of these. So I can quickly go through here and update it. You'll use that. You'll find all kinds of uses for that. So commit that to memory. Make a note, write it down. The insert key is good for repetitive things. Or you'll just pick it up. So, what is this? How does it work? What are the parts? Well, it starts with the keyword switch, and then it has two parentheses. Essentially, it's going to look at a value in there. Normally, we put a variable in there. And it says, take the value in here and then look and see if there's a case that matches that value. Since it's an integer, right here we have integer, we're passing in this argument, case to test. We're going to give it a number. It's going to look in here in this variable and then compare that against the cases that exist. If it doesn't happen, if it's outside of the range, you have this other case. Let's put a few things here. This will be range. Maybe we could even call that. And maybe it says value outside of range. So there's something to keep in mind. Notice we're using that insert key right away. If you don't include the word break, and this case gets executed, what happens? We run it. Case 0 was entered. Case 1 was entered. So by excluding this break at the end, it will do the entire bit of code there, and then it goes to the very next case in line and does all that code until it encounters break. General rule of thumb if you're using switch statements is include break at the end of every switch. Unless you can figure out an example where you wouldn't necessarily need that. Maybe if you had, maybe if this was of type char, and you had capital A, lowercase a, and the user enters A. Well, obviously, you wouldn't necessarily even need code there. This would account for both options available, capital or lowercase, and then it would just do the code related to that. If they enter a lowercase a, well, it's going to do that. If they enter an uppercase, it does that, which is nothing, and then does the next one. So in that situation, you wouldn't necessarily need a break. But you're not really going to have that too often. Most of the time, it's going to be singular ideas that you need to have happen, singular cases you're going to encounter, and then that's the only thing you want to have happen. So if we change these numbers, we have 0 through 3, we run 3 in there, 3 was entered, lets us know that just that code was done. If we enter some crazy number, value outside of range. So 42 wasn't found, there was no 42, and that's where the default picks it up. Cases are cool in that you can program very specific things you want to have happen and then say, well, the default is if they do anything other than that, just throw out an error. And that's it. That's pretty much it with cases. The idea is you're going to look at some value passed from a variable, and then it compares it to the cases there. You want to make sure you have your break statements included at the ends of all that, and your default case. Generally, you could just have a default. Maybe it doesn't need an error. Maybe it doesn't have anything, but include it always. Because then you can, as you're thinking about it, you might say, okay, there could be a situation where they enter some value outside of that range, and if that happens, instead of breaking the program, let's get rid of this and see what happens if we run it. Well, we get nothing. We don't even know what happened. So right there's a good reason of including a default case. Here it gives us a message outside of range. Oh, well, we can pinpoint that. And you could even have it say, the value of range, which is 42, no matching case found. So that is more descriptive and lets us know, oh, something was entered, something was off. That's what we have to work with. So that's it. As far as the switch statement goes, again, summary. Repetition is the mother of mastery. You go through something over and over and over and spend a lot of time with it, you become comfortable, familiar, and essentially an expert at it. Switch statement looks at a variable, looks at the value of a variable, and then compares it against its cases. If none are found, it's ideally to have a default, because then that's kind of like the catch. And include breaks in your statements, in each of your cases. And that's really it. What else is there to say?